Last night, 100 Tory MPs voted against the measure, which passed with support from the opposition. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the rebellion exposed a loss of trust in Boris Johnson and how the country's burdened with the worst Prime Minister at the worst possible time.
So will the Prime Minister take time this Christmas to look in the mirror and ask himself whether he has the trust and authority to lead this country?
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We won that vote last night with Conservative votes, as I told the House. I respect the feelings and I respect the anxieties that colleagues have about. Of course, I do. I respect and understand the anxieties, the legitimate anxieties that colleagues have about restrictions on their liberty. But I believe, and on the liberty of people. But I believe that the approach that we're taking is balanced and proportionate and right for this country.
Well, we're expecting the Prime Minister to make a statement at about 5 o'clock tonight, an hour's time, updating the nation on the COVID situation from the House of Commons. He's also expected to further push the booster programme in the UK. Over 18s are now able to book their booster jab if their second vaccine was 3 months ago. Thames Valley Police says it's highly unlikely that any further survivors will be found following a fire in Reading in Berkshire last night. One person has died and a number of others are still unaccounted for. Witnesses say they saw people jump from the burning building, and one resident said he had a miracle escape by leaping from the third floor. A 31-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder and arson. The cost of living has surged this month as inflation reached its highest level in a decade. The Consumer Price Index is up to 5.1% this month. That's up from 4.2% in October, according to the Office for National Statistics. The increase was led by a steep rise in fuel prices, as well as in clothing, food and second-hand cars.
So it is high, and again, if you look at what's happening with wages, which you published yesterday, although in October wages were increasing above the rate of inflation by about 1.7%, having higher inflation, if all things being equal, it may be that actually wages are going to start going either at or slightly below inflation over the next few months.
A campaigner has lost a challenge against the government over gender-neutral passports. Christy Elan Kane pushed for more than 25 years to achieve the legal and social recognition for non-gendered identity in a case that's reached the highest court in the land. However, the Supreme Court found the UK law doesn't recognise a non-gendered category of individual, and allowing X passports would cause legal issues in confirming an individual's identity. The case was unanimously denied. Now, 7 times Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton has been knighted by the Prince of Wales today for his services to motorsports. He's been honoured just days after controversially losing out on a record 8th F1 world title win in Abu Dhabi. The 36-year-old attended the investiture at Windsor Castle with his mother. I bet she was proud. You're up to date. Now back to the afternoon agenda.
Yes, well, good afternoon, everybody. You are watching the afternoon agenda, and we need to talk about lockdown kids. The government has refused to confirm that schools will open again in January. And bearing in mind that there are already rumours of a January lockdown, it's looking increasingly likely that they won't. We currently have an army of people being mobilised to help with a booster jab rollout and COVID-related services. But where's the army to help support our children? Today sees the sentencing to 25 years in jail of Savannah Brockhill, the vile thug who self-identified as the #1 psycho who murdered 16-month-old toddler Star Hobson, and of Star's mother, Frankie Smith, who was found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child. It comes just a week after the sentencing of the monsters who abused and killed poor Arthur Labinjo Hughes after another sustained campaign of torture. But these cases, whilst high profile, are just the tip of the iceberg. A new report has identified 223 child deaths during previous lockdowns that may have involved neglect or abuse. It was 35 more than the 188 similar deaths reported to the government's Child Safeguarding Practice Review panel in 2019/20. That's a staggering number of children who, due to COVID, were left trapped inside with their abusers, like a living nightmare. I'm not blaming lockdowns for their deaths. The only people ultimately responsible are the warped scumbags who harm children. But when you close schools, you close a safety net. Teachers may see a bruise, they may hear a child talking about it, their child may even go to them personally. Lockdowns also meant that children couldn't play and interact with others, so other parents or their peers won't see anything suspicious. Social workers will be on reduced shifts. It might be tough for them to gain access to people's houses for obvious reasons. But I think we're all sick and tired of child abuse cases being in the news. There'll be an inquiry, there'll be a vigil, there'll be lessons learnt. How many more times do we have to see those all too frequent images of people on streets letting off hundreds of balloons into the sky? I'm sick of it. It's like a candlelit vigil after a terror attack, isn't it? Now, I'm a religious man, don't get me wrong, but I've had enough of these thoughts and prayers. I'd much rather there was action and a plan. And that's what we're calling for right here, right now on GB News, a plan of action. What is it? What is this government's plan when it comes to caring for vulnerable children if there's another lockdown and school closures? At the moment, the plan just seems to be, like it could be, shut the schools anyway, trap the kids at home with abusers, but not just abusers, not just abusers. Alcoholism surged during lockdown. In fact, the number of deaths in England from diseases caused by drinking increased by 20% in 2020 compared with 2019. There was a rise of almost 11% in deaths from mental and behavioural disorders caused by alcohol, an increase of more than 15% in the deaths from alcohol poisoning, and an almost 21% rise in deaths from alcoholic liver disease. Now, I want to make one thing very clear. I'm very sympathetic to anyone suffering with addiction. But the fact is that it's all too often children who are locked inside with these people as well, if you have a lockdown. And they really suffer as a result. And that can lead to massive mental health issues. The number of children who've been referred to mental health service is now at a record high. In fact, it doubled during lockdown. At 65,500, it is more than double the number it was in March 2020 and 68% higher than in March 2019. That's not a coincidence, is it? I've just outlined, ladies and gentlemen, an absolutely devastating picture of the lives of a significant, in fact, a growing number of children in this country. Our government needs a plan. We must break this cycle now. Governments are expected to be the adults in the room. In this case, they quite literally need to be. We're heading towards a lost generation. We really need to talk about lockdown kids. Yes, well, as always, get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or tweet us at GBNews. Now, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Kevin Larkin, has been at the sentencing in that Star Hobson case that I referenced just then in Bradford, and we can go to him live now. Kevin, tell us, please, about what happened in court.
Yes, Patrick, good afternoon. Well, the sentences were revealed about an hour ago, and Savannah Brockhill, the partner of Star's mum, Frankie Smith, was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. She less for 443 days she has already served on remand, but the judge, Mrs. Justice Lambert, said to her, you may in fact serve a great deal longer. As for Frankie Smith, the mum of Star Hobson, she has been sentenced to 8 years in prison for causing or allowing Star's death. She'll have to serve 2/3 of that before she could be released on licence. And there are 3 victim impact statements read out in court, Patrick, each one extremely harrowing, of those family members and friends who loved Star Hobson and wanted to save her and give her a better life. And I just want to go through one of them from Bernard Hobson, who was Star's paternal grandfather. He described a sunny, happy, delightful baby girl, sweet and affectionate, always smiling, and loved by members of her family. And he got very emotional at times and had to pause, understandably so, because of the distress he was under. He said that we will never have another Christmas with Star, and he described the delight on Star's face last year as she was surrounded by her presence. He continued that their biggest regret is that they never had the chance to hear Star talk, to hear her call us grandma and granddad. And I think we can now look at some of the tragic events in Star Hobson's short life.
16-month-old Star Hobson, another child failed in Britain. Failed by her mum's partner who ended her short life. Failed by her mum who allowed Star to be killed. And failed by the authorities who didn't prevent her death.
Star, do you love your mums? Do you love me?
Love was in short supply at their home in Keighley, where Star endured months of beatings and psychological harm from those who the toddler should have felt safest with. Star's mum, Frankie Smith, was cleared of murder at Bradford Crown Court yesterday, but the 20-year-old was convicted of causing or allowing her daughter's death.
If you want to keep your kneecaps, I suggest you stop sending her them. She's with the #1 psycho.
28-year-old Savannah Brockhill, who ended Star's life less than a month after this video was taken.
She was crying and then she stopped crying and then she was sick. And now she's just a little bit floppy, to be honest with you.
Prosecutors described the punching, kicking and stamping to Star's abdomen, which ended her life in September last year. Jurors also saw CCTV of Brockhill hitting Star 21 times in 3 hours, moments after this was filmed, as Star sat in a car seat. This was just 8 days before her death.
To me, she was just pure evil. Just can't believe she could do something like that to a baby girl. It was like, as I say, we were just a quiet, lovely family, and she ascended from the bowels of hell and just completely devastated, wrecked our family and took poor baby Star's life.
David Fawcett's partner Anita was one of 5 people who reported concerns to social services. Once again, questions are being asked of those whose job it is to protect children.
Questions have absolutely got to be asked of Bradford Council's children's services in this case, because what we saw was the great-grandmother and indeed others expressed their concerns well in advance of this horrific murder, expressing their concerns to Bradford Council's Children's Services, and yet nothing was done. And that's why I really do feel that there has to be a change in leadership at the council. I feel that this is the last straw. We have a struggling children's services at Bradford that has gone on for far too long, and things have absolutely got to change and questions have got to be asked, because this is neglect by the Children's Services Department at Bradford Council.
The Labour leader of Bradford Council, Susan Hinchcliffe, said, "Star was let down and we all want to know if anything could have been done differently. It is essential, therefore, that lessons are learned from Star's terrible death so that we can better protect our children." A local child safeguarding review into Star's death will be published next month. It comes less than a fortnight after the stepmother of Arthur Labinjo Hughes, Emma Tustin, was found guilty of his murder. Star's death will feed into the review ordered after Arthur's death by the government. Kevin Larkin for GB News.
Well, you heard the events there, and although the sentencing is now complete and this trial is now complete, the hurt and the pain from those family and friends who loved Star Hobson and were suitable to care for her will endure for forever. And now questions move on, Patrick, to social services here in Bradford. You heard there the Conservative MP for Keighley, Robbie Moore, calling for a change of leadership. He has, in fact, called for the resignations of both the Chief Executive of Bradford Council, Kirsten England, and the Labour leader of Bradford Council, Susan Hinchcliffe. Now, although they have reacted to the verdict of the Star Hobson case yesterday, they are not commenting specifically on that call for them to resign. They are saying they're going to wait until their independent local children's safeguarding review comes in next month. Meanwhile, of course, Star Hobson's death will feed into the national inquiry following the death of Arthur Labinjo Hughes in the Midlands. That's been launched by the Department for Education, and the Education Secretary, Nadeem Sahawi, has said that Star's death will also feed into that as well. So we will find out more, but of course we hear that phrase again, lessons must be learned.
Goodness me. Kevin, thank you in a way for bringing us that. It's devastating stuff, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? It just really shows you the very worst of humanity. And I'm getting reports in here that, this is just according to some reports, obviously, that actually Savannah Brockhill, who's been sentenced now for 25 years for murdering Little Star, laughed as she was sentenced, which I think is the only way that, frankly, this could have got worse, isn't it? But anyway, look, we can talk now to Jim Gamble, Chief Executive of INEC Safeguarding Group and the founding Chief Executive of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre, known as the CEOP. Thank you very, very much for joining us. It's actually quite difficult for me to talk about this at the moment, just having seen that report, and I'm sure you and many people at home feel the same way. But how concerned are you about the impact on kids if schools close and further restrictions are imposed? There was an increase, as far as we could tell anyway, in certainly child mental health issues, but also, one would imagine as well, domestic abuse and vulnerable children, frankly. So what do you fear that the impact of school closures and lockdowns could be on children going forward?
Well, it's not even so much the impact of lockdowns. I mean, we've got to take measures to keep, the public safe and healthy. I think the problem is when you lose line of sight. And in my experience, and I'm the Independent Safeguarding Children's Commissioner in the City of London and Hackney and the Independent Chair of the Safeguarding Partnership in Bromley, there are mechanisms and means whereby you can achieve line of sight using your multi-agency partners, whether it's police, social care or others. So I think we need to keep this in context. Lockdown has become a major issue. There's no doubt that those families with an abusive person living in the house have been at higher risk. And I think, the lessons has been learned phrase is so overused now that I even hate saying that. But we need to look at the practice that's being developed that is good practice in other areas during lockdown and make sure that's applied elsewhere. But let me say this. It's so easy in that peak of emotion to point the finger. And this government are extremely good at pointing the finger, pointing it to local government, pointing it to social care, to policing and others. And don't get me wrong, professionals, safeguarding professionals, need to be accountable as professionals. But the government also needs to look in the mirror. And it's not very good at that, because in the last 10 years, they have asset stripped frontline services. 10 years ago, there were 55,000 vacancies in health and social care. Today, there are 200,000 vacancies. We've got a number of local authorities that are facing bankruptcy. The people that go into work there every day, who deal with the 650,000 referrals into children's social care, they go in because they care. And you know what? About 55 times a year, a child will die either through fallicide, 13 last year, that's where a parent kills them, through physical abuse or maltreatment, 55 to 60 every year. I hate the fact that happens, but can I stand here and say to you, it's not going to happen next year? No, I can't. The
problem is,
and it's all very well having reviews, but the government need to look at themselves and they need to undo the damage they've done to the system in the last decade from coalition to now.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, ultimately, in the kind of spirit of not pointing the finger too much, as it were, as well, I made one point very clear earlier. Ultimately, some of the people responsible for the deaths of these children or the abuse of these children are as well the people actually committing that abuse. And you mentioned their line of sight, and I think it's a really important thing. What we want to try to do here now is, very briefly, I know it's not a brief issue, but is to try to come up with a bit of a plan of how we can make sure this doesn't happen again. Last lockdown, reports coming out of around 223 children who suspectedly may well have died as a result of either neglect or abuse. If another lockdown is being rumoured for January, which it is, how do we stop that from happening? How do we maintain that line of sight, Jim?
Well, I think it's about looking at the good practice that's been affected elsewhere. Certainly where I work in Bromley, we were very, very conscious of those young people who were at school. And let's bear in mind, in this case, Star wasn't at school. But for those children who are vulnerable, we created a register of vulnerable children. We worked with all of our safeguarding colleagues to ensure that one of the partners, be it the police, the health visitor, the social worker or someone, was able to identify where that child was and to have face-to-face contact with them. The difficulty that you are never, ever going to get round is the malicious, the malign and the manipulative individual who behind their four walls will coercively control their partner, will brutalize a child. And unfortunately, I think we do need to look at the training around disguised compliance so that social workers are more alert to it. The problem is now that we are in a heightened state of emotion around this and a heightened state of anxiety because we don't want it to happen again, the chances are that referrals are going to go up. More concerns than are necessary are going to come through. And that's going to make it more difficult to differentiate between that child where there needs to be a critical intervention and the child that actually doesn't need one. So the government need to look at themselves, at the asset stripping. CAMs have huge children and adolescent mental health. There's simply not enough money going in. We have fewer police than ever before, and they're not being trained in the way that they once were because of our lack of resource. You know, social workers are under massive pressure, and I'm making no excuse. If it comes out of a review that something that should have been done wasn't done, then that needs to be looked at. But we've got to look at this in context, and people like you, broadcasters of influence, we've got to almost do that difficult thing, which is step back, take a breath, and say, look, let's look at this sensibly. What has gone right, and how can we duplicate that?
OK, Jim, thank you very, very much. Jim Gamble there, Chief Executive of the INEC Safeguarding Group. Goodness me. Well, it's not going to be a quick fix, is it, ladies and gentlemen? Well, joining us now is Professor Andy Bilson, co-founder of the Centre for Children and Young People's Participation and a social worker with almost 50 years' experience. Thank you very much for joining me. This is happening up and down the country, surely. How do we make sure that our social work system improves? You know, talk about, is it just money? Is it just resources? Is it just more people? Because, look, what I don't understand about this is what has to happen when a social worker walks through the front door of a child's house, right, for that child to get taken off parents. You know, we've seen multiple referrals here in the Star case. I'm not blaming the social workers, but multiple referrals in the Star case here, them coming round and the child was bruised, etc. It looks to me like if that house is clean and the child is clean and the parents aren't addicts, that child probably will stay there.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's very difficult to deal with people who are very manipulative and who are willing to do anything to hide what's going on. In terms of these parents, or in this case, the stepmother, she was very able to hide what was going on, very able to influence people. And I think these things are incredibly difficult to deal with. Your last speaker pointed the finger at the government, and I'm sorry, but I have to say something the same, that, you know, we've seen massive cuts in the amount of services there are, so that social workers are overwhelmed with work. And at the same time, what we've seen over the years following each of these sad and awful, tragic cases is a massive increase in the numbers of children who we investigate. We've tripled the number of investigations that social workers do since 2003. And what that means is that social workers have less time to do the job. We've increased the number of children in care, so they're having to deal with that as well. Basically, we've got a system that was already on the edge of collapse before the lockdowns, and the added pressure of the lockdowns makes it immensely difficult to do a good job.
What is the kind of average day in the life of a social worker? Is that an impossible question to answer? I'm not sure. But, you know, is it referral after referral after referral, house visit after house visit after house visit?
It's a combination of that and having to do lots of administration. If you're taking a child into care, there's massive amounts of administration. If you're doing a child protection investigation, there's massive amounts of administration. You have to write up reports and so on. So social workers, we all believe, don't spend enough time with children and families. And that's made worse as you get more and more defensive practice. And we get more and more defensive practice because children, because of these awful cases. And everybody tries to not be the one that does that. Now, there is, I think there are ways out of this. And
hire more
if you look just down the road from Bradford...
Sorry to interrupt, but potentially hire more administrative staff. If social workers haven't got enough time, by the sounds of it, to do the practical elements of their job. They're stuck behind a desk potentially doing some admin work. That's an area that could be improved, surely.
Well, the admin work is writing up reports that are going to go to court, so you can't really have an administrator, although in many cases you have social workers having to, enter lots of data onto computers. But yes, I think it's well understood that we need to use them to go out more and to have more contact with children and families. The issue, I think, really is also that there's a massive increase, and we're going to see another massive increase in the number of cases that people refer. Everybody will be covering their backs. Health visitors, schools, everybody will be pushing more cases on social work. And we've seen that year on year throughout this century.
Yeah. And look, it goes without saying there will be elements of this lockdown, if there is a lockdown going forward, or school closures as well, potentially, that can only make this problem worse, can't they? Professor Andy Bilson, thank you very, very much. Co-founder there, the Centre for Children and Young People's Participation. Well, goodness me. I really want to know about what you think about this as well. Email me, and lots of you are. I can see them coming in thick and fast. gbviews@gbnews.uk, and tell me what you really think about this particular issue. You can also tweet me at GBNews, and there's a poll up right now, ladies and gentlemen, asking, should the government publish a plan for at-risk children? Cast your vote so I know what you, the nation, really, really thinks. Time for a short break now, and we'll have a quick check of the weather forecast, but I will be back in a tick.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The forecast for tomorrow will be similar for the next several days, actually. Dry for the vast majority, but also fairly drab. Won't be completely dry tomorrow. There will be some rain across the north of Scotland being created by this weather front. But it's high pressure that is starting to dominate across the south, and over the next few days that high will continue to move northwards and control our weather through the weekend and beyond. That weather from those still providing some rain and drizzle over Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland through the rest of this evening. It's gradually going to work north overnight, so turning drier in Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, so maybe some drizzle over the mountains of Wales. Generally a lot of cloud here, but with some clearer skies across northeast England. Temperatures could get close to freezing, certainly in rural areas, and there could be some stubborn fog patches here, so through parts of Yorkshire and Lincolnshire in particular. And if we do see some fog here, well, it may well last for much of Thursday. We should see that cloud and rain starting to pull away from northern Scotland, likely to stay fairly damp in Shetland for most of the day. But elsewhere, as I said at the start, it is generally cloudy but dry. Temperatures still a touch above average, although not quite as mild as today. And if that fog does stick around, well, temperatures could be very much more suppressed. Through Thursday evening, again, a few holes in the cloud could allow some fog patches to form, parts of North Wales and, again, the northeastern quarter of the UK. Generally just a lot of cloud across the south as we head into Friday. That weather front moving away from northern Scotland, so generally dry by the odd little bit of drizzle here and there. Again, some stubborn fog patches are possible on Friday. Again, some brightness, particularly across northern Scotland. Should be fairly sunny for the Highlands across to Aberdeenshire. North Wales also may well see some sunny spells, but for most places it's just looking overcast and grey, as it will do into the weekend. Increasing chance of seeing some thick fog, but generally staying dry and cloudy, but also steadily turning colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back, everybody. You're watching the Afternoon Agenda. Lots more to come, but first, let's get a quick check on those latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. Your headlines at 4:30 on GB News. 28-year-old Savannah Brockhill has been jailed for life with a minimum term to serve of 25 years for the murder of 16-month-old Star Hobson. The toddler was assaulted and psychologically abused for months before suffering catastrophic injuries in her home in West Yorkshire. Her mother and Brockhill's former partner, 20-year-old Frankie Smith, was cleared of murder but sentenced to 8 years for causing or allowing her child's death. A double murderer who sexually abused the bodies of more than 100 women has been sentenced to a whole life term. 67-year-old David Fuller killed Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce before sexually assaulting them in separate attacks in 1987. He was caught 33 years later after a DNA breakthrough. The Prime Minister has defended the decision to introduce COVID passes, describing the move as proportionate and right. 100 Tory MPs last night voted against the measure, which passed with support from the opposition. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the rebellion has exposed a loss of trust in Boris Johnson. And the UK has recorded more than 78,600 daily COVID cases, the highest figure since the pandemic began. The Prime Minister's now due to make a statement in the next hour, actually, updating the nation on the situation. He's also expected to further push the booster programme. And some good news at last. 7 times Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton has been knighted by the Prince of Wales for his services to motorsports. He's been honoured just days after controversially losing out on a record 8th F1 world title. But the 36-year-old attended the investiture at Windsor Castle with his very proud mum. I'm back with a full news update. Top of the hour. See you then.
Yes, afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for everyone who's been tuning in and indeed emailing in and tweeting as well. Been a very interactive show so far, but let's do something a bit different now. More migrant crossings have been taking place in the Channel today as traffic is taking advantage of what has apparently been calmer weather down there anyway. So a surge in crossings is expected in the coming days. It comes as the Home Office has announced as well that the site at Manston Airport in Kent apparently will be used as a processing site for migrant identity and security checks as soon as January. So it's very much going to be considered a permanent thing, isn't it? We can now go live to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's in Dover for us. Thank you very much, Mark. Just outline the situation for us there, please.
Good afternoon, Patrick. Yes, we've had a 10-day lull, really, because of pretty atrocious conditions in the English Channel, but now the weather has begun improving again. We're expecting a window of a few days. And of course, in these times when weather tends to be a little better in the Channel, we see a surge in migrant crossings. And again today, we had the first of those small boats coming across, just 30 so far today, but it's due to calm down even more overnight. And we're told from our sources that there is significant activity on the French side of the Channel, so we are expecting that a number of small boats will try to make that crossing overnight and into tomorrow. And this will, of course, be the first real tester, I think, for the French authorities since the drownings of the 27 migrants last month and that almighty row between the French President Emmanuel Macron and the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, with each pointing the finger at each other. Well, Britain are very clear that the French should do more in terms of trying to stop these boats from leaving the beaches in the first place. The French say they are stepping up patrols, so we'll just see how many manage to get off the beaches of France tomorrow. As I say, 30 have made it across today. On this side of the Channel, you mentioned in your introduction that there was also some moves afoot to try to commandeer part of that military base at Manston in Kent to use as a processing centre to check on the identity of those who are claiming asylum. An indication, I think, and an acknowledgement from the UK authorities that there is concern about the fact that so many of those crossing in the small boats don't have documentation. They're told by the people smugglers to throw away their documentation and instead come across, make it more difficult for them to be returned potentially to their country of origin. So they will be housed, we're told, at a purpose-built assessment centre within the Manston base, where they'll be held for up to 5 days while those identity checks take place.
Yes, indeed, Mark. What's going to happen tonight then if we have these boats coming over in the dead of night? I mean, I don't imagine that it's particularly warm down where you are at the moment as well. The conditions might be milder, but you know, surely it's still going to be a big issue. It's going to be very, very tricky for our security services to pick them up, isn't it?
It's surprisingly not that difficult. They are spotted in the first instance by the likes of drones and police and border personnel on the beaches of France, but what happens is they tend to surge out, so you maybe get 5 or 6 or 7 or more boats that will launch from stretches of beaches around about the same time, and it's impossible then, the French authorities would argue, to be able to prevent all these boats from launching. Once they're in the Channel, well, it is cold. Even today it's been milder for this time of the year, but it's still cold, particularly out in the Channel. So hypothermia is a big issue, and of course those who've been out on these boats for quite a few hours before the authorities on this side of the Channel can get to them often are requiring medical attention by the time they get to the UK. There has been a warning as well that's been issued by the National Crime Agency about the way in which the people smugglers are increasingly using boats so that they can cram more and more migrants onto. They are, we're told, purpose-built, adapted designs, especially for the people smugglers, but they're very dangerous and they are very flimsy in nature. The National Crime Agency issued some pictures, some images of these vessels. They are of the type, the design that resulted in this tragic loss of life last month in the Channel, with 27 people having lost their lives as it effectively just gave way and started sinking below these people, plunging them into the water. So the National Crime Agency now asking maritime personnel, those involved in the maritime industry, to be on the lookout for the types of materials that people may be trying to purchase with a view to designing and building these boats.
Exactly, and about time too, I think, isn't it, Mark, when it comes to that? A lot of people, after the death of those 27 migrants, tragically, were saying, look, hang on a minute, how are these boats actually being manufactured? Where are people getting this stuff from? Surely we can do a bit more to try to track that. But Mark White, thank you for reporting live from Dover for us, as ever. Mark White, our home and security editor, bringing the very latest, as it looks as though migrants are going to be crossing that channel left, right and centre in the coming days. But look, we're going to go to a quick break now. I'll be back very shortly. Make sure you keep those views coming in, ladies and gentlemen. GB Views at gbnews.uk, and of course on Twitter at GBNews. A lot for you to get stuck into today. There's the vote that was last night in the House of Commons, wasn't there? There's what you've just heard from Mark White there, increased levels of channel crossings, and of course the sentencing of the vile monsters who killed Star Hudson. I'll be back shortly.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Now, before the break, we were talking about the migrant crisis, and it's fair to say it's caused serious diplomatic tensions between London and Paris. Now, relations worsened, of course, following that recent tragedy in which 27 migrants drowned trying to make the crossing from France to the UK. Now, after the incident, French President Emmanuel Macron accused the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, of not being serious in his approach to the issue. He's also previously, as well, called him a bonehead, I believe, which wasn't particularly nice for diplomatic relations. So with the ongoing migrant crisis, the fishing row and, of course, the AUKUS pact driving a wedge between our two nations, who historically have always got on incredibly well, will the upcoming elections help to ease this situation? Let's talk to Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, Paris-based correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, and for The View from the UK as well, Joel Roland from the independent think tank UK in a Changing Europe. Thank you very much, both of you, for getting on board with this show. Well, look, who to start with? I think I'll go over, why not? Let's go over to Anne-Elisabeth first and just ask, how do you view Anglo-French relations at the moment? Because from where I'm sitting, it's not been particularly great for a while now.
It's less than great. It's actually probably the best we shot at one another some time back. It's in terms of diplomacy, it is truly terrible, and it's not only because there are many aspects of policy which are different, but also there's the French attitude, which is especially that of President Macron and would-be second-term President Macron against Brexit in general and Boris Johnson in particular. You have a difference of outlook, you've got a difference of view on Europe, you've got a difference of style, you've got a difference even of substance, because they really believe in different things. And so you've got something that is both ideological and personal, and it's probably the worst situation, and everything suffers from that. And now, of course, we are into the sort of last 4 months of the French presidential campaign, the presidential election, where Macron will seek re-election, even though he hasn't admitted to it yet, is on 7th and then 21st of April, the first round and the runoff. And he suddenly finds himself in a more difficult situation than he thought until about 10 days ago, because so far, every projection, every poll showed him winning the second round. And this time, a poll showed the Républicain candidate, the centre-right candidate, Valérie Pécresse, suddenly shooting ahead of him 52-48 in the second round, if she gets to the second round, which is not necessarily a guarantee.
OK, Joel, I'll throw over to you now, of course. Joel Relland from the independent think tank UK in a Changing Europe. I've previously described Emmanuel Macron as suffering potentially from a little bit of a case of short man syndrome in a big, wide world of especially more bullish leaders. Is that fair or not?
To be honest, I think the main thing you have to understand in terms of the political pressures on him is the domestic French situation. It's important to understand that he's in a race at the moment against two, what you'd probably call far-right candidates in Éric Zemmour and Marine Le Pen, which means that he is vulnerable to attacks from them saying that he is presiding over a France that's in decline, that's not what it once was. And so Brexit is a point that he's particularly sensitive to because he risks being shown to be pushed around by the British. And I think that's why you're seeing France take a very hard line on fishing, on migrants, and also because the constituencies up there, in terms of fishing, Brittany is an area which actually really supports Macron compared to other parts of the country. And where the migrant crisis is up in Pas-de-Calais is a Marine Le Pen stronghold. So these are really, really important political constituencies. And as long as this election campaign is going on and he continues to feel vulnerable to attacks from the far right, Macron will take a very firm line with the United Kingdom and Boris Johnson.
OK, now, we are a bit pressed for time, so I'll just ask you one more each. If you could be brief, that would be OK. Anne-Elizabeth, what is the Eurosceptic sentiment like in France at the moment? Because I do wonder whether or not Emmanuel Macron is trying to rail against that a little bit.
Well, strangely enough, if you ask the French what they think about Europe and then what they think about European institutions, there's a very recent poll, about a week old, that says that the feeling of Euroscepticism in terms of Brussels institution is almost as strong in France as it is in Britain, whereas the French always declare that they are the idea of Europe itself. They are pro, they feel European, but there's a sort of dissociation between Brussels, which is not well perceived, and which may prove a problem during Emmanuel Macron's campaign because he's supporting it, and the rest of the country. And the other candidates, most of them, except for possibly Valérie Pécresse, have actually also expressed an element of Euroscepticism.
Thank you very much. Joel, I'll throw it to you. Does a lot of this stem as well from essentially our fishing deal? And if it does, unless we rescind on that or cut Emmanuel Macron a bit of a deal, going his way on that, it's never going to get any better, is it? Have we set in now? Is this going to be, in your opinion, the future of Anglo-French relations?
No, I don't think it is at all, actually. I think this is really a condition that's set by the presidential elections which are coming up in the next 4 months. And I think also you have to look from the UK side, because obviously there are two actors in this situation. Boris Johnson has also tried to often blow up relations with the EU, blow up relations with France in order to serve domestic political interests. We saw that with the gunboats in Jersey in May, just before the local elections. I think he's starting to realise that doesn't always go so well when you've got many wider domestic political crises. We've seen him lower the rhetoric, and I wouldn't be surprised if by next spring, after the French elections, different political context here, we're looking at actually potentially improving relationships.
Brilliant, both of you. Look, thank you very, very much for that. It was fantastic stuff we've had there. Of course, Anne-Elizabeth Moutet, Paris-based correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, And also Joel Rolland from the independent think tank UK in a Changing Europe. It doesn't look particularly like before the election anything's going to change with Anglo-French relations, but potentially afterwards, then maybe it will. That's where we are. Right, OK, well, look, thank you very much, everybody who's been tuning in and getting in touch, of course. We are now going to go to the weather, I understand, so I'll see you on the other side of that.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The forecast for tomorrow will be similar for the next several days, actually. Dry for the vast majority, but also fairly drab. Won't be completely dry tomorrow. There will be some rain across the north of Scotland being created by this weather front. But it's high pressure that is starting to dominate across the south. And over the next few days, that high will continue to move northwards and control our weather through the weekend and beyond. That weather from those still providing some rain and drizzle over Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland through the rest of this evening. It's gradually going to work north overnight, so turning drier in Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, so maybe some drizzle over the mountains of Wales. Generally a lot of cloud here, but with some clearer skies across northeast England. Temperatures could get close to freezing, certainly in rural areas, and there could be some stubborn fog patches here, so through parts of Yorkshire and Lincolnshire in particular. And if we do see some fog here, well, it may well last for much of Thursday. We should see that cloud and rain starting to pull away from northern Scotland, likely to stay fairly damp in Shetland for most of the day. But elsewhere, as I said at the start, it is generally cloudy but dry. Temperatures still a touch above average, although not quite as mild as today. And if that fog does stick around, well, temperatures could be very much more suppressed. Through Thursday evening, again, a few holes in the cloud could allow some fog patches to form, parts of North Wales and, again, the northeastern quarter of the UK. Generally just a lot of cloud across the south as we head into Friday. That weather front moving away from northern Scotland, so generally dry, bar the odd little bit of drizzle here and there. Again, some stubborn fog patches are possible on Friday. Again, some brightness, particularly across northern Scotland. Should be fairly sunny for the Highlands across to Aberdeenshire. North Wales also may well see some sunny spells, but for most places it's just looking overcast and grey, as it will do into the weekend. Increasing chance for seeing some thick fog, but generally staying dry and cloudy, but also steadily turning colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Afternoon, everybody. Right, now, the UK has recorded its highest number of daily COVID cases since the pandemic began, with just over 78,000 people testing positive. And we're being warned that there could be a huge number of cases in the coming days. The government has already said that NHS appointments will be postponed to push through the booster jab programme. So what does all of this really mean for patients who've had their appointments delayed or cancelled? We're also, of course, aren't we, hearing about potential school closures, potential cancellations for those GP appointments. What does all of this practically really mean for us? And, of course, as well, how are these queues doing for those beloved booster jabs? Joining us now is NHS GP Dr Veena Babu, who will be... sorry, Veena, thank you very much. Will face-to-face appointments go back online, do you think? A lot of people are going to be very concerned of that. Misdiagnoses potential. Look, talk us through that, face-to-face GP appointments.
So already we're having a lot of face-to-face appointments all over the country. So each clinic, runs a bit differently. So some may have 70% face-to-face, some may have 30%. So we have telephone, virtual, and face-to-face appointments as a combination in every clinic. So even if we speak to a patient on the telephone, we have the option of bringing them in to examine them or seeing them on a camera. Specifically for the elderly, we always prefer to bring them in because they might not be as tech savvy or be as comfortable in front of a screen.
Are you concerned? There was something that came out today that, look, at the moment, it's all just rhetoric, so we'll have to wait and see, about potential now for patients who are in the NHS to be trying to move back out into care homes as quickly as possible to potentially free up beds. Look, I'm very worried about this because look what happened in care homes last time. Are you concerned about that?
So not directly from what you're saying, because I think it's a matter of, yes, of course, change is inevitable. And with the changing news, changing rates at which people are getting infected, I think the priority needs to be getting as many people given the booster doses, getting as many people getting their second doses. Even in the UK as a whole, I think as of now, we have just over 24 million overall third doses being given. So that needs to be more the priority and concern.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very sorry to cut you short. I know you've been waiting for a little while there, but unfortunately, we're going to have to just leave it there for now. But we'll get you back on soon. I'm absolutely certain of it. Dr Veena Babu there is a NHS GP. Just talking about those NHS face-to-face appointments, which I know so many of you at home really, really care about. Thank you, and apologies again for it being...
You're welcome.
But you're watching the Afternoon Agenda, and there is lots more still to come. Yes, well, look, obviously, quite a slight technical issue there, but don't worry about it. Apologies for that. I'll just carry on regardless. I think that's the plan. So anyway, look, it's been a big day in the world of news, hasn't it? Not all of it, it's fair to say, particularly pleasing. Look, we started the day, didn't we, with the news that broke overnight or yesterday evening. 99 Conservative Party rebels there who basically said, look, OK, Boris, no now to vaccine passports. Of course, it wasn't enough to stop them. Where do you stand on that? How does that practically affect your life? Let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Boris Johnson's premiership, is it now in terminal decline? What do you think? It was really interesting yesterday, I think, at the 1922 Backbench Committee, the noises that were coming out of there, so that Boris Johnson did get a few old knocks on the table from people, but actually, even the rebels, the vast majority of them anyway, despite calls for him to potentially face a leadership challenge in the new year, actually said, Boris, we want to be very clear with you. We don't agree with you on this, but we don't necessarily want a change of leader. We want you to get a grip. Do you think Boris Johnson will be able to get a grip? Do you think he even knows what a grip is? GBViews at gbnews.uk. You can get in touch with us as well on Twitter. Other news that's come out to us today, which loads of you have been getting in touch with in the inbox as well, has been what's going on in the Channel. We are experiencing another influx of migrants crossing the Channel. And on top of that, the thing that we really hung the show on and that we're going to be going back to, again, very, very shortly, is this absolutely catastrophic story of poor Star Hobson, who was killed, really, by an abusive stepmother and, indeed, her own mother as well. Really shocking stuff. The sentencing, I think, was interesting. 25 years, apparently, for her killer, the one woman who was sentenced to murder. But actually, she laughed, apparently, when that sentence was read out to her in the dock. I've had a cracking email in here. It says, look, I've always believed, this is from Stephanie, thank you very much, Stephanie, if anyone laughs in the dock whilst they get sentenced, they should have their sentence doubled. And I think you'd have to go a long way, frankly, a long way to find anyone who disagrees with that, don't you? I absolutely think that's shocking stuff. And we really did speak, didn't we, about the fact that children now are in massive, massive trouble, especially if we have another lockdown. But you know what? We'll get stuck into all of that very shortly. So this is, of course, the afternoon agenda. This is, of course, me, Patrick Christys. I am in for Alex Phillips. This show is all about that discussion, it's all about the debate, and it's all about the things that you really care about, and actually, frankly, should be on your agenda to begin with, maybe. So with that in mind, here's what we'll be covering today. So the Prime Minister and health chiefs are set to address the nation with the latest on the booster rollout. Make sure you stay tuned for that, because that's supposedly anyway coming very, very shortly. We'll be going live to Downing Street for that. The Welsh Government has been accused of removing the words boy and girl from the education curriculum, especially when it comes to the sex education curriculum, which means they would technically have removed sex from the sex education curriculum. We'll hear from an opposition politician who's speaking out about that. And after a series of high-profile and devastating cases of abuse, as I alluded to before, we really need to talk about lockdown kids. Should the government publish a plan for at-risk children if schools close and we go back into lockdown? That's the agenda for you in the next hour, but what's on yours? Email in gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's now time for your latest headlines.
At just after 5 o'clock, this is your GB News. My name is Polly Middlehurst. As you've been hearing, the woman who murdered 16-month-old Star Hobson in West Yorkshire has been jailed for life. 28-year-old Savannah Brockhill was given a minimum term to serve of 25 years. The toddler was assaulted and psychologically abused for months before suffering catastrophic injuries. Her mother and Brockhill's former partner, 20-year-old Frankie Smith, was cleared of murder but sentenced to 8 years for causing or allowing her child's death.
Throughout her short life, Star was subjected to endless physical assaults and psychological harm. Instead of the love and protection, she experienced a world of humiliation, cruelty and pain at the hands of those who should have protected her the most. It is impossible to imagine how any parent or carer could inflict this pain inflict this pain and suffering on an entirely defenceless little girl.
In COVID news, the UK has recorded more than 78,600 daily COVID cases, the highest figure since the pandemic began. The Prime Minister is due to make a statement imminently, updating the nation on the COVID situation. We'll bring that to you, of course, live just as soon as it begins. He's expected to further push the booster programme. It's also been announced that the retired Court of Appeal Judge Baroness Heather Hallett will chair the public inquiry into the pandemic. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson has defended the decision to introduce COVID passes, describing the move as proportionate and right. 100 Tory MPs voted against the measure yesterday, which passed anyway with support from the opposition. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the rebellion exposed a loss of trust in Boris Johnson, and now that the country is burdened with the worst Prime Minister at the worst possible time.
So will the Prime Minister take time this Christmas to look in the mirror and ask himself whether he has the trust and authority to lead this country?
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We won that vote last night with Conservative votes, as I told the House. I respect the feelings and I respect the anxieties that colleagues have about. Of course I do. I respect and understand the anxieties, the legitimate anxieties that colleagues have about restrictions on their liberty. But I believe, and on the liberty of people. But I believe that the approach that we're taking is balanced and proportionate and right for this country.
Well, as I said, we are waiting for a statement from Downing Street, a news conference rather. That was due to begin at 5 o'clock. Sometimes it does get held up a little bit. The Prime Minister due to be accompanied by England's Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, and NHS England, Dr Nikki Carmen. We'll bring that to you, of course, as soon as we get it. In the meantime, in other news, Thames Valley Police says it's highly unlikely any further survivors will be found following a fire in Reading in Berkshire last night. One person has died and a number of others are still unaccounted for. Witnesses say they saw people jumping from the burning building, and one resident says he had a miracle escape by leaping from the 3rd floor. A 31-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder and arson. A double murderer who sexually abused the bodies of more than 100 women aged between 9 and 100 years old has been sentenced to a whole life term. Let's just bring you now that news conference from Downing Street. Interrupt the news to bring you that and take you straight
Eligible
to
adults in
Boris Johnson.
England can use the national booking service to get boosted now.
Lose the strap, please.
If you're over 18 and had your second jab at least 3 months ago, then you can get jabbed right now. And it's absolutely vital that you do, because the wave of Omicron continues to roll in across the whole of our United Kingdom, with over 780,000 COVID cases today, the highest ever daily number reported. And the doubling rate of Omicron in some regions is now down to less than 2 days. And I'm afraid we're also seeing the inevitable increase in hospitalizations, up by 10% nationally week on week, and up by almost a third in London. But we are also seeing signs of hope, because since we launched our emergency Omicron appeal on Sunday night, a great national fight back has begun, and people have responded with an amazing spirit of duty and obligation to others. And I want to say that each and every one of you who rolls up your sleeve to get jabbed is helping this national effort. And I want to thank everyone who has come forwards, whether you've had to queue around the block at a walk-in centre or whether you've booked online. And of course, on behalf of the whole country, I want to thank our NHS, our GPs, our pharmacists, who with barely a day's notice, 48 hours notice, have so accelerated the programme that we began this week with the biggest vaccination Monday ever in England, and yesterday, the biggest booster day yet, with more than 650,000 boosters delivered across the whole UK. And across the country, after all they've been through, those teams are going to keep going through Christmas and beyond. Jab heroes like Kim Kirk, leading the King's Mill Hospital vaccination hub in Mansfield, who was asked a year ago to do it for 4 weeks and has been doing it ever since, with 180,000 jabs and counting. Dr. Laura Mount and the team at Central and West Warrington Primary Care Network, who've been organising pop-up vaccination clinics for the homeless. Or the team at Home Park in Plymouth, who have been regularly jabbing until 2 a.m. because they just carry on for as long as there are people there wanting a booster. And I want to thank those from every walk of life who are stepping forward to support them. The military personnel deployed across every region of the country, including an additional 100 in Scotland from yesterday, as well as 2,500 firefighters. And since Sunday night, we've seen more than 20,000 new volunteers signing up to help with the booster effort as stewards, taking the total number to almost 33,000. With every day, we're expanding the ranks of these healthcare auxiliaries, an emerging territorial army of the NHS in a race against time to get those jabs in arms and save lives. And if you're watching this and you want to get involved, just visit the website nhsvolunteerresponders.org.uk and do something this Christmas that you can tell your grandchildren about many Christmases from now. In total, we've boosted more than 45% of all adults in England, including more than 88% of those aged 70 or over. And while hospital admissions are going up nationwide, we're starting to see admissions coming down among some of the more vulnerable older age groups where we've already got those boosters in arms. From tomorrow, we're speeding things up even further by removing the 15-minute post-vaccination waiting time. And while we're at it, from Monday, 12 to 15-year-olds can book in for a second jab. And we know how crucial it is to keep children in school, so let's all make sure our children and young people are vaccinated before they go back next term. As we take forward our national mission, we're of course supporting similar efforts by the devolved administrations, which are also rapidly increasing vaccination rates across Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. A COBRA meeting with Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast is taking place this evening. But already, the pace of rollout across the 4 nations is such that the UK as a whole now has twice as many boosters per head as the EU and more than twice as many as the United States. So let's keep going, let's keep giving Omicron both barrels, and let's slow its spread and give the vaccines more time. Wear face masks indoors, use ventilation, get tested if you're going to an event where you're likely to meet lots of people, and get tested if you're going to meet elderly or vulnerable relatives. And we're helping you to get the tests that you need. I want to thank the Royal Mail, who are doubling home deliveries of testing kits to 900,000 a day from Saturday. So let's slow down Omicron's spread, and at the same time, let's reduce the harm Omicron can do to us by building up our vaccine defences. We're jabbing in hospitals, we're jabbing in surgeries, we're jabbing in pharmacies and in pop-up centres, we're jabbing in shopping centres and on high streets, in football stadiums, with mass events planned at Stamford Bridge and Wembley this weekend, and daily jabathons at Elland Road in Leeds. We are throwing everything at it, and wherever you are, we'll be there with a jab for you. So please, get boosted now. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Chris to do the slides.
Thank you, Prime Minister. First slide, please. I'll start off with slides that people have seen before, the updates, but I think there is an important thing to point out on this slide, which is the very high spike on the very far right of this slide. And as the Prime Minister said, this is a record number of cases. I'm afraid we have to be realistic that records will be broken a lot over the next few weeks as the rates continue to go up. If we look at the overall rates, it looks as if Delta, which we've had with us for a while, is still flat, and the growth is Omicron. So what we've got is 2 epidemics on top of one another, an existing Delta epidemic, roughly flat, and a growing Omicron, very rapidly growing Omicron epidemic on top of it. Next slide, please. When it comes to hospitalisations, this really always, of course, reflects where we were two or more weeks ago, and therefore the rates have remained reasonably flat over quite a while, reflecting where we've been with Delta over the last several weeks. So rates are currently flat, but they are beginning to increase in some places, particularly in London. Next slide, please. And deaths, of course, reflect what happened even earlier in time. And those are still, if anything, going down very slightly. But this, of course, doesn't reflect anything in terms of Omicron, because the emergence of Omicron and its spread is far too recent. Next slide, please. Dr. Kanani is going to talk more about the vaccination in a minute, but I just wanted to give a visual picture of the speed at which the initial rollout, that's in blue, the second dose, which is in orange, and now the booster rollout is occurring in red. And as you can see, it's going up very rapidly and accelerating, and that will continue to happen over the next period of time. Next slide, please. When I showed this slide at the last session, people said they wanted a bit more time on it, and I want to make 2 points on it. What this shows is what the hospitalisation rates and different age groups, where in the dark bars are people who are not vaccinated, and the orange bars are the people who are vaccinated with 2 doses. First point, this provides massive amounts of protection against hospitalisation against Delta. This is what we're showing. But what we're expecting to happen with Omicron is that some of that difference is going to be eroded because it is the vaccines are less well matched to the Omicron variant. This is what the laboratory data are implying. We don't have clear clinical data yet. And therefore, the point of the booster is to try and get people back to as good a position in terms of replicating this really good protection after they've had their booster dose. It will additionally provide protection against Delta and other variants. So that is really what we're aiming to do. But this is, when people say, do vaccines work? I really do think if people look at these data, they cannot really argue, except that vaccines are remarkable at working. But people do still go into hospital even when they're double vaccinated, and they will still go into hospital even after boosters. But their risks are much reduced. Next slide, please. Now moving on to Omicron. And what I'm showing here is a screening test for Omicron. These aren't genotype things. This is what's called S-gene target failure, but now any S-gene target failure pretty well represents an Omicron case. And the reason we're showing this is you get these data earlier than you get the data from the full genotyping. So it's more up to date. Now, I'd like to point out two things with this. The first of which is the count of numbers is now going up very fast. I'd like to point out also that the greyed out bars, those data are incomplete and will increase. Again, I saw some commentary that said, that shows it's going away next time. The last bits of data, and the same is true in the UK, it's also true incidentally in South Africa, the last bits of data will always increase as new data comes in. But both the numbers, but also the percentage of cases is steadily rising. So an increasing percentage of all of our cases is now Omicron. But that's not because Delta's going away, it's because Omicron's being built on top of that. Next slide, please. The final slide I wanted to show is really just to show that this is happening across the whole of England. It's also happening very clearly in Scotland and beginning to happen in Wales and Northern Ireland. But these are data from England. In London now, the majority of cases in London are going to be Omicron. And therefore, that is going to be where we will be from the time we get to probably Christmas onwards. I would expect most cases going to hospital to start to be Omicron cases. I would like to make one final point before I hand on over to Dr. Kanani, which is I think that there has been a certain amount of commentary about the fact that doctors and scientists from South Africa, and I really want to pay huge tribute to South African science and medicine, what they've done so quickly has been remarkable, have indicated that there may be some reduction in the hospitalisation rates they're seeing with Omicron. And I want to put a really serious caution on this, because I think it has been overinterpreted. The first caution on this is simply a numerical one. If the rate of hospitalisation were to halve, but you're doubling every 2 days, in 2 days you're back to where you were before you actually had the hospitalisation. If the peak of this is twice as great, then halving of the hospitalisation rate, you still end up in the same place. And this peak is going very fast. But the second point I wanted to make, which I'm not sure has fully been absorbed by everybody, is that the amount of immunity in South Africa for this wave, because of a prior Delta wave in vaccination, is far higher than it was for their last wave. And therefore, the fact that there is a lower hospitalisation rate is unsurprising. So if you think about what happened to us in the UK with our alpha wave in January, February this year, the infection hospitalisation rate for people over 65 was around 22% prior to vaccination. Once you have a lot of immunity due to primarily vaccination and then also some natural infection, the infection hospitalisation rate in the same age group has dropped to 6%. That's just because there's more immunity. Well, there is more immunity in South Africa now than there was in their last wave. Therefore, some degree of drop is to be expected. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't some degree of slightly milder disease. That is possible. But I just think there's a danger people have overinterpreted this to say this is not a problem and what are we worrying about? I want to be clear. I'm afraid this is going to be a problem. Exact proportions of it, of course, South African scientists and UK scientists and scientists globally are trying to determine at the moment. I'd like to just pass on for the last slide to Dr. Kanani. Nikki.
Nikki, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So there is clearly one single challenge that our country faces right now, but we have two asks of you as a member of the public. One is please come forward and get your booster. And if you're unvaccinated, come forward and get your first dose. Or if you're severely immunosuppressed, get your third dose. Your vaccine is there and it's waiting for you. And our second ask is please help your incredible NHS team. Come and work with us as a volunteer or a paid member because we need your help. Since the Prime Minister and our Chief Exec, Amanda Pritchard, set out the call to the nation, the national mission around vaccination, we've seen an incredible response. And it's the sort of response we've seen all through the pandemic and through the first part of the vaccination programme. People have come forward again and again to help us, but to get protected as well. And as I've been around the country visiting vaccination sites, I have seen queues around the block, but people have been incredibly kind and thoughtful and patient, looking after our NHS teams while they wait to get protected. Our NHS teams have done an incredible job. Day on day, we are now seeing record-breaking numbers. Yesterday, we saw an incredible amount of vaccinations delivered by community pharmacy alone, absolutely through the roof, and they're doing a fantastic job. But you need to do your part. From today, you're able to book an appointment online to get your vaccination if you're over the age of 18. You go to the national booking system and you can book a time and date that suits you near to where you live. Or if you're travelling, you could book somewhere near to the work that you have to do if you're an essential worker, because we're making it more convenient than ever to get protected. We've already vaccinated over 20 million people with their booster doses. That's over half of eligible 18 and overs and 3/4 of eligible 50 pluses. That's a huge number. And today, when we open the national booking service to everybody who's eligible over 18, we had over 500,000. So that's over 500,000 bookings by the time I left the office to come over here. So I know that everybody wants to play their part. So thank you for coming forward when you're asked to. Thank you for booking now that you're able to. My thanks, of course, need to go to our NHS and voluntary teams who once again are pulling out all the stops. I know that you're tired. I know that this feels hard, but I also know that you can do it. I've heard from countless people around the country saying, we want to help you, we want to help the programme, we want to respond to the mission, because fighting Omicron is the most important thing that we can do. But I want to reassure you that while our GP teams who have been delivering the lion's share of vaccinations will be vaccinating more again, they will also protect urgent and life-saving care alongside cancer care. So be patient with your NHS and with your general practice teams, because they're trying to do everything to protect you as quickly as possible. As the Prime Minister said, our teams are getting out into the community, just like at the beginning of the programme. We are going door to door to look after the housebound. We are asking the severely immunosuppressed to get protected as quickly as possible with their booster if they've already had their first 3 doses. We're asking teachers to come forward during the school holidays to get protected before school starts again. We have got pop-ups, we've got mobile units. We're working with community and faith leaders to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to get this protection. So please come forward. And as the Prime Minister said, we have lots of opportunities to help. I know of many people, many of my friends who I'm incredibly proud of, who are busy as it is, who are saying, I want to come forward and I want to help at vaccination sites around the country. And any little that you can do will help us to deliver this enormous ask. Our team are working as quickly as possible to get volunteers onto the front line. And I just want to make sure that you know that you can all play your part. Get tested when you're asked to and follow the government guidelines. Make sure that you focus on getting your booster if you haven't already. And if you're able to, come forward and join this fight against Omicron. Because I promise you, if you can come and help us, our NHS will be here for you. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Nikki, and thank you for everything that you and your teams are doing. It's absolutely amazing. Can we go now to questions from the public? Teresa from Stourbridge. I'll read Teresa's question out. If initial steps to prevent the spread of Omicron in the community have failed, why is the government rolling back on contact self-isolation for Omicron confirmed cases instead of making self-isolation more widespread for all COVID cases to further slow the spread of all variants? So I think what you're asking there, Teresa, is why are we going for the daily contact testing instead of the the self-isolation period of 10 days. That's because we think we can get the same result, and we think we can do that without generating what everybody remembers from earlier on this year, the pingdemic. And the reason why I think that's a good idea, Teresa, is because as we go into this particularly tough time of the year for the NHS and many other organisations, we want to keep supply chains running. We need to keep things moving, and a pingdemic would really make things much more difficult. So we think we can tackle it in that way, and we think that's appropriate. Anything you want to?
Well, the only thing I just wanted to add, Prime Minister, was just to re-emphasise we're talking here about contacts. If people have got COVID, if they've got symptoms, we would want people to self-isolate, because those people have a high risk of transmitting, and this is an incredibly transmissible virus.
Correct. Thank you very much, Teresa. Addy from Nottinghamshire. With the spread of Omicron increasing, what is your plan for the clinically vulnerable? Do you plan on putting shielding back in effect? I think I'm going to hand that straight over to you, Chris, and Nikki, if you want to comment.
Thank you, Prime Minister. What we've decided is that at this point, shielding came with some very serious downsides for the people involved in the shielding, including loneliness and mental health issues, practical problems. So it's not an area we want to go down if there's any way of avoiding doing so. But there is a lot of things we need to be doing for the clinically vulnerable, and they include, for people who are immunosuppressed, I think as hopefully most people who are in that situation know, that they should get 3 doses of vaccine as their primary course, and then subsequently they should get a booster on top of that. So they should have 4 doses in comparison to the rest of the population having 3. And there will also, for example, be things we'll be wanting to look at in terms of antiviral drugs and how we best can use them in this group of people who are particularly high risk. I don't know whether, Nikki, you want to add anything to that?
I think that's fine, thank you.
Thanks.
Good, thanks very much. Let's go to Laura Koonsberg, BBC News.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. As you've said, there have been more cases today than there ever have been. If now isn't the time for extra restrictions, when will be? And to both of the medics, can I ask you really straightforwardly, do you think it would be better if there were now more restrictions immediately, and should the public cut back on their Christmas plans?
Thanks, Laura, and I'll have a go at that first. And let me explain what we're trying to do. I think this is the right approach. It's a double strategy. It's a left and a right for Omicron. We're going with Plan B, as we said we would, in the event of the numbers starting to rise, and in the event of a new variant appearing. And that's the right thing to do. And everybody, you'll have heard me repeat earlier on what we need people to do: to use ventilation, to wear masks inside, continue to wash your hands, exercise caution, to do daily contact testing and so forth. If you come into contact with somebody who has Omicron, to isolate certainly if you have Omicron, and to get tested when you want to go to a nightclub or another venue. All those restrictions are coming in, and that's the right thing to do to slow the spread of the disease. But what we're also doing is using a tool that we didn't have, Laura, if you think about it, a year ago, when we were also facing a spike, and that is the huge advantage, not just of testing, but also of vaccination and the booster. The booster does provide, all the evidence seems to be, the booster does provide an excellent level of protection. And we think that given the balance of risks and the balance of continuing uncertainties about Omicron, this is the right approach to take, the right mixture of approaches, that to do these two things at once. And the progress that we're making with the booster is absolutely vital. These numbers are extraordinary for the British population. I mean, we really are boosting huge numbers of people now. We've got a much higher proportion of our population boosted, as I said at the outset, either than the United States or than the rest of Europe. I think over 90% of the 75 to 79-year-olds have been boosted now, and that's terrific, because it's those groups, don't forget, that sadly provide the bulk of those who are likely to die from COVID. So by getting boosted now, we can really build up our wall of protection whilst we slow down the spread of the disease with Plan B. So it's a two-pronged effort.
My answer would be, ministers clearly have to choose between really unpalatable options, but what we do not have at the moment is clear data on some of the really key questions, and the two that I think are the most important are what is the hospitalisation of severe disease and in due course mortality rate with 2 doses, which we got right the way through the population of existing vaccines, and what are we looking at with a booster on top. Remembering we've now got the great majority of people over 65 boosted, and that rate is going up. Those data will come in. There's some very early indications from lab studies, but they're not really strong enough to be able to make strong clinical recommendations. And obviously ministers will take a lot of account of new information as it comes in. In terms of your second bit of your question, I think that what most people are doing is, and I would think this seems very sensible, is prioritising the social interactions that really matter to them, and to protect those ones, deprioritising ones that matter much less to them. And I think that's going to become increasingly important as we, for example, go into the Christmas period. And people are also taking a lot of precautions, and I think this is exactly right, so that, for example, if they're going to visit a group of people, or if they're visiting vulnerable people, they're taking tests beforehand. I would strongly encourage that, and strongly encourage sensible things like really good ventilation, meeting outdoors if that's appropriate and easy, and all the things we know that we've done systematically through this. So I just think a lot of this is people following sensible rules, but prioritising the things that really matter to them and deprioritising the others.
Thank you. All I would add is that my patients have had very mixed experiences through previous lockdowns, and some have been incredibly isolated and their mental health has really deteriorated. So everything that we can do as a public, as individuals, to reduce the burden of the disease, to get our boosters and to make those choices that Chris describes is right. I want to see my immediate family on Christmas Day, so I'm going to be really, really careful until I get to that moment. And not just testing, but watching what I do and prioritising, working on the vaccine programme, working in general practice, so that I can get those special moments with my family. And I know that that's what everyone will choose to do if they can, because that's our best way through, along with getting booked for their booster.
Thanks very much. Robert Peston, ITV.
With the best will in the world, the surge in boosting is not going to kick in for 3 or 4 weeks, but now is the moment when people are going to parties, they're going to the pub. Why aren't you more explicitly discouraging them from doing that? Dr. Canini, you said that your colleagues are working incredibly hard. They're exhausted. For 18 months, they've been putting their lives at risk. If I could ask you and Professor Whitty, how did you and they feel when you saw those photos of officials in Downing Street and Conservative Central Office having parties when they were risking their lives and the rest of us were in lockdown? And finally, Prime Minister, would you welcome a police investigation of the parties that took place here?
So I'm going to ask Chris, you want to go first?
I don't have a huge amount to add to what I said previously, which is I do think people should prioritise what matters, and that by definition means deprioritise other things. And I think people are doing that, and I think I would recommend that, and I think most people would recommend that. I don't think you need a medical degree to realise that is a sensible thing to do with an incredibly infectious virus, about which there are quite a lot of key things we don't know. And then in terms of other areas, yes, I think it's a statement of fact that when people think there's unfairness, and particularly if they think there's unfairness in high places, of course people get angry. I'm not commenting on individual cases or commenting on the rights or wrongs of anything, to be honest. I never have throughout this, and I don't intend to start now. But what I do think is most people actually separate that out from their absolute need to think seriously about what's good for them, their communities, their families, their workplaces, and the wider country. And people, I think, really are taking that very seriously, and I don't think those two are in conflict. I think people basically can do both simultaneously.
I think what I would add is that our staff, as I said, have been working for a really long time, both through the pandemic and to deliver this incredible vaccination programme. And I think they'll keep going. Whatever else happens nationally in other places, we're here to look after our patients and our public. And that's what drives me every day, no matter what else is going on. And that's what my teams and my colleagues will continue to focus on.
And I just say to you, Robert, that I think you completely mischaracterised the events in this place where people, to the best of my knowledge, have worked blindingly hard for a very long time in cooperation with people around government and across the whole of the public services to do our very best to keep people safe. But we'll, of course, hear from the Cabinet Secretary about what he believes has happened. And indeed, if the police think there's anything to follow up, I'm sure that they will. But I think that, if I may say so, I think that the public can readily, as I think colleagues have said, the public can readily distinguish between these types of reports and these types of accounts and the overwhelming imperative that we have now together to tackle this disease in the two-pronged way that we are. And I think those are the messages that I'm seeing the public understand very, very loud and clear, and really responding magnificently with the way people are. You said it'll take 2 or 3 weeks for the vaccine rollout to get going. That's not my impression. It's
the immunity to build up.
Well, I think actually I think that is a moot point, because I think that I'd like to hear from Nikki and Chris on that. I believe that with the booster, you start to get at least some immunity, perhaps a bit quicker than you've suggested, but perhaps that would be...
Well, I think the general point is a very reasonable one. Actually, the timing, yes, I would expect some protection, probably even beginning within a week, and quite a bit within 2. So it's a bit quicker, but your general point, which is, of course, there's going to be a delay, is a fair one. It's just probably slightly less than you're implying. Nikki?
Yep, all we can do is move as fast as we can so we can get people protected, and that's why the other points that Chris and PM have already made are right. We follow the guidance that's there. Work from home if you can. We need those trains as empty as possible so essential workers can go in safely. Wear your mask as much as you can, and look after each other. That's what we're here to do.
Thanks. Tom Newton-Dunn, The Times.
Professor Whitty, question for you. Jenny Harries today said the Omicron variant was the most significant threat to public health we've seen during the pandemic. Graham Medley, as you know, chairs SPIAN, has called it a very real possibility of the NHS being overwhelmed. Do you agree with those two statements? And may I also ask you just to give us a little bit more detail on what you said were studies on severity and mortality? You said they weren't complete yet, but can you share with us what you know so far on that? Prime Minister, question for you. I want to bring up the vote last night. Sorry about that, but it is relevant to this whole discussion. Now, a lot of your MPs say it wasn't just about COVID passes, it was about you. It was about your leadership, and they want you to change. They want you to run a better operation, a better number 10, and stop putting the car into the ditch, to use your words. Will you change, and if so, how?
So, on the first one, and echoing a point that Nikki made, this is a really serious threat at the moment. How big a threat, there are several things we don't know, but all the things that we do know are bad. And the principal one being the speed at which this is moving. It is moving at an absolutely phenomenal pace, and therefore between the time that it first starts to really take off in a way people will be able to see, and the point when we get to very, very, very large numbers will be quite a short one. And that, I think, is part of the issue in trying to deal with this. So I certainly echo the fact that this is a very serious threat. I think to compare it to each of the very major threats we've faced, I think it's quite difficult, because as the Prime Minister said, we do have some things going for us this time, of which the most important is the existence of effective vaccines and the ability to boost at speed at this stage. So I think I do not wish to underestimate this, and for my NHS colleagues in primary and secondary care, I am afraid there will be an increasing number of Omicron patients going into the NHS, going into hospital, going into intensive cares, and the exact ratios we don't yet know, but that there will be substantial numbers, and that will begin to become apparent, in my view, fairly soon after Christmas. It'll start before then, but in terms of the big numbers, I think that's a reasonably, I'm afraid, a reasonably nailed-on prospect. In terms of what I was trying to explain on the severity, and it is a relatively subtle point, but I wanted to make it because I think it's been misunderstood. There are broadly two ways that a virus like this could be less severe if someone's caught it. One of which is it's intrinsically less severe, it's just as a milder virus, and there are milder and more severe viruses ranging from ones with 100% mortality, rabies for example, all the way down to ones with essentially 0% mortality. So you could have a move on that. But the other way, which is much more common actually, where something becomes more severe is because we have more immunity. And the point I was making is South Africa, between the last wave and this wave, their degree of immunity has substantially increased. And therefore, there is much greater South African immunity to COVID in general, not specific to Omicron, than there was in the last wave. So some decrease in severity you would expect because of some protection from increasing immunity. In contrast, for our Delta wave, we already had incredibly good immunity due to the amazing job the NHS has done in double vaccinating everybody. So we don't have that additional thing on top. So it may be that some of, possibly even all of, any decreased severity from South Africa is just explained by immunity, and if that's the case, that's not something you would necessarily replicate here. The second thing is from South African data, incidentally, of course, is that their age groups are very different. There are a number of other very major factors, HIV, a whole bunch of other things. So reading across data, I think, needs to be done with very strong care. On mortality, so we do have hospitalisation data from South Africa. The rates in hospitalisations in South Africa are now going up relatively fast. On mortality, we do not yet have data, and that's because this is so recent. And of course, as everybody knows, there's a lag to getting infections, a lag to getting symptoms, a lag to getting to hospital, and then a lag to a minority of people dying. And that time frame has not happened. So we don't yet have data on mortality. And obviously, as soon as we do, we will share it with the public.
Yeah, and Tom, just on your point about Parliament, look, I do understand the people's feelings of principle about what they see as infringements on liberty, and we've been trying throughout this pandemic to keep society, keep our lives as open and as free as possible, and that's the aim of what we're doing. Indeed, the aim of Plan B Plus, the Get Boosted Now campaign, is to ensure that our next year is as free and as open as possible, and we protect our society and our economy in every way that we can. I have to say, I don't think that the measures that we're proposing or that Parliament enacted for nightclubs and some other settings like football matches in any way amount to a vaccine passport, because after all you've got to do, you just got to get a lateral flow test, or if you have proof of vaccination, then you can get in. It's entirely optional. So I don't follow that line of argument. But I just want to say I'm grateful that Parliament voted it through. Large majority of Conservative votes went to get this done, and it will help us to keep the country on track. I think if we can do these two things at once, implement Plan B in the way that we're describing, plus get everybody boosted at record speed in the way that we are, we'll be able to move forward and keep on the path that we have begun to travel. Now that is made possible because of the incredible efforts of the NHS and the British public, and those are the people I really want to thank. I realise I said you were from the Times. In fact, you're from Times Radio now, Tom.
Was about will you change? Wasn't about the vote last night. They want you to change.
I'm certainly not going to change. Thank you very much, Tom. I'm certainly not going to change the policies that have led to the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, the fastest booster campaign in Europe now, and delivered 500,000 more people in jobs now than there were before the pandemic began. And those are the things which I would respectfully suggest that the public are also keen to focus on. Steve Swinford of The Times.
Professor Whitty, in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon is advising people to limit household mixing over Christmas. Is that something that you think families should be thinking about as we approach Christmas, to limit the number of other households that they interact with over the Christmas period in their own homes? And Prime Minister, the last time that you held a press conference, you were saying that people should go ahead as normal with Christmas parties. Now, we've just heard Professor Whitty say we should be deprioritising less important social events. So do you think that people should still be going ahead with Christmas parties, or is it time to cancel Christmas parties? And furthermore, about New Year, what are you thinking about New Year? Should people be planning big social events at New Year, or should they be limiting those now?
Chris. I mean, I'm probably going to start record on this. I really think people should be prioritising those things and only those things that really matter to them, because otherwise the risk of someone getting infected at something that doesn't really matter to them and then not being able to do the things that do matter to them obviously goes up. I don't think you need to be a doctor to think that. I think that's what most people are very sensibly calculating, and that seems to me a sensible approach, personally.
Yeah.
The whole point about the point I'm making is, don't mix with people you don't have to for either work or for the sort of family things that really matter to you, would be my general advice to people in this kind of situation. But people have to make their own choices.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I agree totally with Chris about the response that we're already seeing from everybody, our general instinct to be more cautious. But I said many times that I thought that this Christmas will be considerably better than last Christmas, and I stick to that. We're not cancelling events, we're not closing hospitality, we're not cancelling people's parties or their ability to mix. What we are saying is, think carefully before you go. What kind of an event is it? Are you likely to meet people who are vulnerable? Are you going to meet loads of people you haven't met before? And get a test. And I think that is very, very good. Make sure that there's ventilation. Wear a mask on transport, and get a test before you go. So we're in a different environment thanks to the boosters from where we were last year. But we've got to be cautious and think about it whilst we wait for the benefits of the boosters really to kick in. Thank you. Mesa Hall, The Express.
Thank you, Prime Minister. If I could ask the medical experts, I mean, it's becoming clear that we're going to need to keep having boosters to keep topping up our protection against coronavirus. I mean, what's your best guess for how often we're going to need to do it? Is it going to be every 6 months, every 3 months? And is there a case for a permanent national vaccine service to deliver boosters? And Prime Minister, if I could just pick you up on you talked about keeping supply chains moving earlier. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of work absence as people become infected and have to take time off work. Are you concerned at all that emergency services, essential industries may come under pressure, and what steps are you doing to cope with that?
Thanks.
Shall I take the first bit?
Chris, then Nikki, and then I'll do supply chains.
I think it's not yet clear how often we will need to do boosters. Essentially, there are two separate reasons to need to do a booster. The first one is that the immunity was good, is still good, but is waning. So that's a matter of topping it up from time to time. And then the second one is, as we got with Omicron, something comes in field left that actually the vaccines work less effectively against, and you need to do something to actually top it up, to actually get on back to where you were before the new variant came in. Now, on the first of those, we don't yet know how long the immunity will take to wane. In general, I think most people who look at this would say that after a booster, the waning may be a bit slower than it was after the second vaccine, but we don't know that. And so we need to see those data and make decisions on that. And of course, immunity is quite complicated. It's made of several different elements. It's not just antibodies, it's a variety of other ones. But of course, whenever we do get a new variant, for the moment, we have to ask the question, does this need a new vaccine, as is being asked at the moment. Now, in the long run, my expectation is, and when the long run doesn't mean many years, but maybe not this year, in the long run, we would expect that we'll get what's called polyvalent vaccines, where you have multiple different forms of the virus in the same vaccine. And the reason that's important is it makes it a lot harder for the virus to evolve around that. At the moment, we've simply got a single thing based on the original strain. Once we've got those, I think new variants that can do as much change as Omicron will probably become rarer. Still may happen from time to time, but we do now have technologies that mean we can move them very quickly. That's a long answer, but I think it's something which a lot of people ask, so I thought it was probably worth laying that out. Dr. Kanani may want to comment on the second bit.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I mean, it's something that we are obviously thinking about. How do we get the right vaccine infrastructure? Prior to the pandemic, which feels so long ago, we did have a vaccine infrastructure. It was our general practice and community pharmacy teams that would vaccinate children. It was our school teams that go in and vaccinate in schools, and obviously our annual flu vaccination. So we're used to having to do things annually and cyclically, but we are definitely in a different position now, and we can't keep using sort of big venues every time. So we are putting that infrastructure in place. We are asking, obviously, as you've seen, our community pharmacy colleagues to step up, but we're also seeing that other venues are offering their services, not just now, but into the longer term as well. So as we learn what we need to do to respond to this variant, we'll build the infrastructure in the background so that once we know the sort of pattern that we're going to have to respond to, we'll have that infrastructure in place.
And Mesa, to your point about supply chains, we're going to throw everything at it to try to sort it out. Actually, some of the issues that we saw earlier in the autumn have started to get better, like the HGV driver shortage. But we are going to make sure that we do everything we can. We're recruiting huge numbers of people, for instance, for the NHS, trying to help the care sector. So vital that we get the staff there. Daily contact testing rather than self-isolation, I think will help. I'm not going to pretend this is going to be necessarily as smooth as everybody would want, but we've got to get through it and repeat the key message. The best thing everybody can do is get boosted now. Get the booster fast as you can, and the higher our wall of protection. Andy Woodcock, Independent.
If I could ask the medical experts, you've suggested that people will be prioritising family get-togethers on Christmas Day itself this year. I think a lot of people out there will be thinking that situation, you have multiple generations coming together from multiple households in close quarters, quite possibly very little ventilation, particularly if it's a cold day. I think people will want reassurance. Is it really advisable for that sort of event to go ahead? And could I ask all three of you, are you planning to, what are your plans for Christmas Day itself, and are those being scaled back? And to the Prime Minister, since the reports of various parties at Downing Street, or alleged parties at Downing Street, there have been polls suggesting a fairly sharp fall in public trust in politicians generally, and in yourself personally. Keir Starmer today said that you didn't have the trust and authority to lead the country through this crisis. I was wondering, while the questions about alleged rule breaking are still unresolved at Downing Street, that is, are you still confident that you are the right person to be giving instructions and guidance to other people in a way that will maximise public compliance?
Thank you. Chris and Nikki on Christmas.
I didn't say what people would be doing. Some people prioritise Christmas Day and some people would prioritise other things. All I was saying is people should prioritise what matters to them, and usually that is family, that different people from different traditions will take different approaches. In terms of, but Christmas is clearly the majority at this time of year. In terms of realistically, I think there's a high chance that my original Christmas plans with family are going to be interrupted. I hope it's not completely, but we shall see. And I also am very realistic about the fact that in advance of the situation where large numbers of people enter hospital, very large numbers of people in society, and that includes doctors, nurses and other healthcare workers, are going to get COVID at the same time, because this will be a very sharp peak, and there will be significant problems of people actually providing staff to man and to generally be able to look after any part of the health and social care system. And so people like me should keep some degree of flexibility to actually deal with the fact that actually we may end up with quite substantial gaps in rotas at short notice. And I just think that is, unfortunately, given and this is back to Nikki's point, given how much difficulty my health and social care colleagues have had over the last 2 years, saying that is pretty depressing, because they have really, really had to stand up and go back again and again. But the reality is the speed of an onset is going to lead to lots of people getting ill simultaneously, and we have to be realistic about that.
Thank you. Andy, this is our chance to make choices for each other and for our NHS. So my advice would be, if you're going to go to a stadium at the weekend, make it one where you can get your vaccine or help out to give a vaccine, rather than going to watch a match. And to that point, if you're a role model in society, please get your vaccine, because actually it's dependent on all of us to show the way right now and to make decisions that help to protect society. As for my Christmas plans, they're already scaling back. There will be far fewer things that I'll do with my children as we run up to Christmas. And if they're listening, sorry, but that is absolutely a fact. But we will enjoy it together, and we'll enjoy it at home, and we will enjoy it safely. And as and when I need to work over the Christmas period, I will be, just as my colleagues will be, because that's what we're here to do. So everyone, just book your booster now, because that is our best way to protect our NHS and to protect the people who are giving all of their time and energy to look after our public.
Yeah, Andy, as for my own Christmas plans, I think the way things are looking, I expect a lot of us are going to be working throughout the period. My own plans, as you can imagine, are pretty modest at this stage. But I just, on your point about rules, I think I follow the rules. Everybody across politics should follow the rules. But what I notice actually is that the British public, in response to what we said on Sunday, have really got the point that this wave is coming in, that there are two things that we need to do, that we need to implement Plan B. That's now going ahead, but everybody also needs to be getting vaccinated, getting the booster. And that's I think the numbers are extraordinary. People are queuing round the block across the country, in towns and cities across the UK, and every day we're adding more and more people, more and more volunteers. 33,000 now coming forward, another 20,000 people coming forward to help get jabs in arms. And that message is unquestionably getting through to people. It is a fantastic thing. It's absolutely vital that people hear it loud and clear. So I'm going to repeat it. Get boosted now. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That was, of course, the very latest from Downing Street. What did you make of that? Well, that's all from me. With you at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. Again at 4 p.m. for a bit more agenda. But up next, it's Jude and Cap.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.